One last question before the meeting starts. The Twins are up 10-2 in the bottom of the 8th.
Really?
0 outs. What are the odds that they win this?
50-50.
I was going to say it's about 50.
Lately, yeah, that's even being gracious.
Depends, does Cologne get in the game or not?
And it could.
Yeah.
They got room for 2 grand slams.
That's what about there.
Seem to be throwing away, no pun intended, some of those games.
All right, it's 3 o'clock. We will call our monthly Hutch Utilities meeting to order. Before we get started, are there any conflicts of interest by any of the commissioners today?
None.
All right, item number 2 is to approve the consent agenda, approve the minutes, and ratify payment of bills. Anything anybody needed to pull out of there today?
I done.
Care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by Don, second by Monty. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 3 is to approve the financial statements.
So not a tremendous amount of change for the month of March. As you can see, electric side was pretty consistent this March versus last March. Usage was fairly consistent. Year to date actually is almost the same as 2020. So we're staying fairly consistent as far as the electrical usage side of things. Overall, positive $6,200 profit for the month, so just a hair better than we had last March, but nothing really significantly out of the ordinary for the month of March. We did not have a power cost adjustment for the month of March. On the electric side, we did add some dollars to our rate stabilization fund. If you look back at the cash designation report, about $81,000. So we're starting to, I think that's the first time we've been above the minimum $400,000 threshold in over a year, probably. So we had fairly, I don't want to call it cheap, but lower prices as far as the energy side of things for the most part. So we're sitting pretty good there, or at least consistent from last year on the electric side. Gas side, we were down about 11% on usage. It was a little bit warmer month, so we saw some sales loss there. As far as consumption, we were down about just under 2.5% from last year, even with the polar vortex. We had a pretty consistent drop off for March. Obviously doesn't help our case on the gas side, but still fairly consistent as far as the profit. The P&L for the month of March was just under $225,000, fairly consistent to March of last year, so nothing significantly changed out of the ordinary for the month of March on the gas side. As well, again, we did not have a fuel cost adjustment on that side. Obviously, we've talked about that we need to start replenishing our rate stabilization fund on that side. So we obviously won't be giving back credits. We typically probably we would have given back credits a month, but since we did not provide credits back, we ended up adding about 51,000, I think it was, to the rate stabilization fund on the gas side. 54,848. So we're starting to build that up. If we keep on that trajectory, and obviously I'm adjusting the monthly rate to keep us on the trajectory by the end of the year, we should be back around that $600,000 mark in our profit margins. Gross margins should be back around that 35-40. I don't think we'll hit the normal gross margins that we'll hit unless we want to, really ramp up some rate pieces of the rate stabilization fund. But we'll be back, really, in a good position by the end of the year. We'll be back at a good position as far as our rate stabilization fund. Again, at least with the current range we have, I know we've talked about adjusting the ranges on the gas side for that. That's probably a conversation we should have as we move through this year of where your guys' comfort level is on increasing that range. Obviously, some big portion that we've talked about in the past too will be if regulatory things come down the pipeline. Pun intended, as far as rate caps, pricing caps, things that have been talked about with our local legislators, with some of our senators, some of the conversations going on at the federal level. Brief conversation today, obviously, it doesn't appear on the surface, at least down in the ERCOT market and some of the southern states, that they really want to take a whole lot of proactive steps to winterize wellheads, winterize a lot of their generating facilities and fleet down there. Obviously, part of that is their posturing. Right now, their markets aren't set up and designed to to really incentivize people to make significant infrastructure improvements and protect some of that stuff down there. And so obviously they're gonna push that back to the federal government and say, you know, you want us to do these things for the greater good of the country, then, you know, we need to create a market mechanism to allow us to do those things. And so this thing's gonna go on back and forth for quite a while, but the initial indications are they don't really wanna take some of the original advice that was even back as far as 2011 on winterizing things down there. So, and the biggest reason is just they constantly repeat in conferences and meetings that if we make an investment and another company doesn't make an investment, now we're at a competitive disadvantage. So until we all are on the same playing field where we're all incentivized to do something, some of the people that would do some things aren't going to. And that's just the way their structure is down there right now. And until they fix that, you're gonna see a lot of those companies not willing to do anything down there. So, but it's got significant conversations, significant points of interest at the federal level, particularly some of our local senators are some of the ones that are more proactive and more of the staunch supporters of getting some things reconciled. So we'll see where that goes. I'll keep you posted on some of those legislative things.
Jeremy, along those lines, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Has there been any conversation regarding any potential ARP funds? The availability of those things, the chances of recovering some of those things and putting into the rate stabilization fund? I've got to believe that's got to be a conversation for some of the utilities that were really hit hard that didn't do what we did.
They've talked about that. They have yet to come up with a mechanism to allow refunding. The sense I'm generally getting in these meetings is they're not looking to do anything retroactive. That's the general feel I'm getting is we're not going to refund people. We're not going to give money back, even if some of this investigation inquiry comes up that, hey, there was some price gouging going on, these markets were over manipulated.
Right.
I'm just not getting a strong sense that they're gonna do anything retroactively. It's gonna be moving forward.
Yep.
Now, with that being said here, that the state level, they've talked more so about providing some customer relief in the form of some aid back or some revenue back on that. But even the sense I got, even with the investor owned and some of the PUC, they're real hesitant about doing anything retro for utilities or retro for customers.
Yeah.
So it's been talked about briefly, but I don't get the impression it has gotten a lot of traction on that. I think people get really nervous about doing things retro and, okay, who did it impact? Okay, it impacted this block of customers positively, but who did it now become a detriment to? And I think you're not hearing that in these meetings, but I'm getting the sense behind the scenes, there's those conversations going on where if we have to repay some of this money back or we have to go through some type of mechanism to refund money, that puts us in a bad situation for those people that came out on top or kind of came up
Right.
positively. So,
But depending on what comes out with the ARP funds, I don't know that a lot of the rules have been written yet about what's eligible and what's not.
Right.
It may be a good idea to really keep a close eye on that going forward. Like you said, probably not retroactively, but going forward. And if it's available, throw your hand up.
I know the other piece they talked about was trying to do something in the short term through the Natural Gas Policy Act of trying to do some type of refund or some type
Right.
of aid back on that. That's got people who acknowledge they have the ability at the federal level through the Natural Gas Policy Act to do some of those things. But again, they acknowledge it, but they really don't say, hey, I'm gonna push some bill or I'm gonna push something forward. At least I haven't heard of those in those meetings yet. I think some of this stuff is still preliminary, and I think people are trying to balance, what type of support can we get from this? What type of lashback are we gonna get from the natural gas industry? That type of thing. And some of them are waiting for the final inquiry to come out between FERC and NERC to really, I think, push some initiatives there. That's what I'm getting from a lot of the legislators is, yeah, we understand there's a problem. We understand some people made some money, some people lost a lot of money, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the ratepayers took a huge blow here. But they've been really reluctant to push any real concrete program or policy until that whole investigation piece kind of wraps up there. So.
I have a question or comment to the commissioners based on a comment Jeremy made just a little bit ago. Are we still going to ask Jeremy and staff to work on plans or whatever to increase the size of the rate stabilization fund for the gas side?
I think we should.
Yeah, so put that on your to-do list and make some recommendations, I suppose, on mechanisms to get there and the size of fund that you think might accommodate
Yeah, well, I did reach out to.
the twice in a lifetime events.
In the last 3 years.
Well, that's a good point, because I haven't followed up with them, but I did reach out to our consulting firm that did the cost of service study, and I asked, hey, what's the normal industry standard on parameters, benchmarks, metrics to come up with your rate stabilization fund ranges? And he said he had a couple ideas and a couple of things that he generally sees around the country as far as the metrics they use. Of course, he was on the phone with me 2 weeks ago, and I kind of lost track of it, but I'll follow up with him and see what he has as far as some options.
Yeah, I think if we can get that, as we start to claw back to the max limit throughout the rest of the year, I think we should be prepared to make a decision in the back half of 21, so it can potentially fill up in 22.
Served us well this time.
Yeah.
Whether it's just a designation or whatever it needs to be.
Served us well this time, and
We'll
served
be
us well
ready.
back in 2017 when we had the January or Christmas, December time. Ended up pulling
Correct.
some thousand out of that time too, so.
And the biggest thing I keep going back to is the reaction that we got from the ratepayers was very strong. The strongest in the tenure that I've had on the commission. It was the strongest reaction I've gotten. So that, in my mind, elevates it on a priority level.
And I communicated that with both senators when we met. The one thing that customers want, and I said we're all ratepayers, is they want reliability, predictability in their bill, and stability. When one of those things go out of whack, it becomes a huge concern for customers. And this time it was predictability and stability of their bills. I mean, that just, people can't believe that those things can go up that high, and then they start questioning, well, why didn't you do a better job of buying gas? And why can't you do a better job of predictability and those things? And our senators get it, our local representatives get how the gas markets work. And so that's why we said we really need you guys' help to create that stability on the pricing side of things and on the supply and demand side of things. You gotta have a better balance there, which means you have to have a better mechanism in place for people to weatherize and incentivize them to keep the supply there when we need it. So I think something will come out of it this time. What and how far they want to push that, it's really going to be a battle between the federal government and really some of the southern states to really keep that supply and demand in balance. And then obviously the side effect of that is the pricing.
And in the meantime, while they try to figure that out, we can do our stuff internally.
Otherwise, in the financials, things pretty consistent. So any particular questions on anything there?
No, I don't have anything.
I got nothing.
More questions? Anybody have a motion to approve the financial statements?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Anthony, second by Bob. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4, we don't have anybody, no guests today. Item 5, D, legal. Mark, do you have anything for us today?
Nothing other than what's unfinished business.
Sure.
It's going to be nothing.
So 5E leads us to general manager. Jeremy, do you have anything else?
No, just, obviously following the legislative stuff this time of the year. And so we met with a couple of our Minnesota senators and some of our local legislators and kind of watching how things kind of transition and move forward. A lot of obviously energy things in the states forum at this point. With all these other things going on with police reform and renewable standards and where the House is at and the Senate is at on bills and bonding and infrastructure. I don't know that a lot of things in the energy side of things are really going to get accomplished this year. It's kind of all getting muddled up with all the other stuff. So the one thing that seems to be moving forward, at least at this point, is really the reform of SIP, the Conservation Improvement Program. It's now called the ECO Act. Where they're really trying to push electrification in that. Creates way more confusion than it's probably doing any good, because on one hand you're talking about energy conservation, but on the other hand in the same program you wanted to have people use more electricity, so it just created so much confusion there. But it's gone through the House fairly well. It is receiving some resistance on the Senate side, and the main reason for that is the propane industry obviously doesn't want people to go to electrification because they feel that that industry will start to, decline and will away. And so how we think we can get it through the Senate side is really to put some type of expenditure cap on electrification. Of course, where our stance is on the MMUA side, and municipal utilities, is we're locally regulated. And why would we, if our community chooses to go electrification and put in programs to meet renewable standards and to do those things, why would we want to cap ourselves and be able to spend money on those programs to move, our community towards the direction of the federal and state level? So, so that's kind of halted there. The Department of Commerce, we've been going back and forth with the Department of Commerce on not including any additional items in the bill, but we'll kind of see where that goes.
Does it have any traction?
I think if we said, hey, we won't spend any more than 10% of our SIP on electrification, I think that would go through the Senate, because I think a lot of the Senate side, the Department of Commerce has a lot of their ears, and they've been obviously lobbied significantly hard from the propane gas side of things, which for you guys to keep in mind, obviously electrification impacts us on the natural gas side, right? It could impact us if we're moving towards electrification and heat pumps and more vehicles and less gas and less furnaces to heat your homes, and we're going to electric heat pumps. That's going to have an impact on us on the natural gas side as well.
And other communities extended to pull off a
Correct.
pipeline.
So that's kind of where it's at. I don't know if that's going to get resolved or not. Of course, the Senate and the House are really on two different playing fields when it comes to the renewable standards that the House wants to put in place. So there's these bills getting there individually and moving through individually. I don't think they're happening. They're going to throw them all in these big omnibus bills, and then the Senate's going to say we don't like your bill, and the House is going to say we don't like your bill, and then they're going to bring a conference committee together, and they're going to bring people together and they're going to try to hash it out. But that's kind of where it's at, and we're going to see they're going to throw all the noodles on the wall and see what sticks essentially. But that's kind of where it's at. So a lot of these things that have individual merit, they're not going anywhere. So there's too much divide there right now, and they're too far away from the bills. So I don't anticipate a ton of energy-related things getting through, and obviously then with the police stuff going on, that's taken a huge amount of attention away from some of these other things. They're just not as big a priority as far as some of these other items right now, because of motions and social impact and things like that. So, but I'll keep you updated on the legislative stuff. But that's all I really have at this point.
All right, thank you. Item 6, the policies. Looks like they're just up for review. No changes today. Item 7 is unfinished business. Status of the governor's salary cap. Mark?
So dovetailing off of Jeremy's discussion, neither of these bills has moved an inch since last month. As Jeremy mentioned, it seems like the legislature's preoccupied with bills involving policing right now, and everything else is kind of taking a back burner. So nothing really to report on that. I guess I'd ask that it just remain on the agenda at least for one more month till the end of the session, and we'll see what happens, if anything, at the end.
Okay, we'll keep that on the agenda for one more month. And
Yeah, I did get we talked a little bit about that MMUA too last week. They said they don't anticipate anything happening this year, but it's got traction for next year. And the piece that seems to be something that's more supportive is not just doing away with the salary cap altogether, but disconnecting it from the governor's salary and putting a cap on like $220,000 or $215,000, but not having it tied to the salary, not having it tied to the governor's salary, versus just doing away with it means you can pay someone whatever you want to pay them, right? That seemed to get more traction. We can still cap, we can put a dollar cap on that, but we can't have it tied to the governor's salary. So, but kind of what Mark said, there doesn't seem to be much traction for any of these kind of side little things right now. They got bigger fish to fry down there. So
Hopefully if they get that far, they'll tie it to inflation or some number to make it continually follow. so it doesn't become outdated again.
Right.
Next time we meet, the year will be half over already, so we'll stay on top of that. We'll have to reach out to everybody here as we move on, so. Item 8, new business. 8A is the approval of HTI/TDK natural gas transportation and commodity purchase agreement.
So this is the annual agreement. HCI's is obviously, theirs is done, expires April 30th or May 1st at 9 o'clock. So we went back and forth and updated our contract. Not a lot has changed from our last year's commodity contract. The only one thing that has changed is we increased our monthly charge from $145 to $215. That's essentially following our cost of service study. We did the same thing with the 3M contract a couple months ago when we approved that. And so the rest of the stuff, as far as the transmission charge, the distribution charge, those things are all written out of our cost of service study and the type of margin that we're supposed to be getting on these transport customers. So we're just asking you guys to approve it again for another year. The revised transport and commodities agreement with those guys.
Anybody have any questions? Entertain a motion to approve this?
Move to approve?
I'll second.
Motion by Anthony, second by Don. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Right?
Any opposed? That motion carries. Agenda item 8B is to review of 2020 annual benchmarking report.
So I wanted to have I had Angie just move it out of the kind of the financial area just down into business, just to give you guys a little bit more opportunity if you had questions or wanted to walk through anything particularly. Obviously, this is our annual report, kind of finalized report that we get every year. So this is 2020's numbers. Generally speaking, the same trend is happening, obviously with most of our benchmarks that we use as far as service interruptions, the duration of interruptions. As you look at our numbers, obviously we're always above not only the region standards, but most of the utility standards as far as on the electric side of things. When you look at the duration of service interruption, our utility for 2020 was about 9.35 minutes. The utility region is 42 minutes, so we're about, 75% lower than that in our particular region. And then obviously if you look at our customer class size, the average customer interruption is about 90 minutes, where we're at 9, so we're 90% roughly lower. There on the average interruption frequency, we're just at 0.24 as far as the frequency of interruption. Essentially, we don't have a whole lot of interruptions here as far as frequency. Obviously, we report on a monthly basis if we have a service interruption. Very minimal, which leads into some of our metrics that we use for our RP3 designations, where we're 99.99% reliable. We just don't have a lot of interruptions here. And the other piece that I always like to look at is the customer average interruption. That means when there is an interruption or we have a fault or we have something that goes down, how long were our customers out. And you can see ours is just under 39 minutes once we have an interruption or something goes down. Where if we look at our region, it's about 81 minutes, so we're less than half the amount of time. The big part of that is just how the system is designed, our distribution system in town. We got a lot of redundancy, we got a lot of feeders that we can reroute power because we have the ability, and the size of our feeders can carry load from different areas, and so we reroute a lot of times when there's a service interruption. We call it in, and a lot of times before our guys even come in to even do the work, we've already shifted some of our load through dispatch to a different sector, and so a lot of times we can get those people up and running before we even have the outage fixed. And so then it's just a matter of our guys coming in and then fixing the default or wherever that case may be. So, but that goes to proper planning on the electric system, reliability, and how it's designed. A lot of people don't quite have some of that, where they can load shed and they can reroute some of their electricity to different feeders in some of their different regions in some of those communities. So that's why you see ours is significantly lower in minutes. Those are probably the big things, and then, again, one of the big things that they look at is average service availability. You can see ours at, call it the ASI index, we're at 99.99, so we're consistently above, national average, not only municipal, but also investor homes. And we just don't have a lot, obviously a lot of that's a big part of our distribution system is underground as well. And when you look kind of at the bottom of the report, you see a lot of the common outages. It's trees, it's squirrels, it's things that really impact overhead lines, and we just don't have a lot of that piece here. And the other piece I think we've talked about in the past, when you kind of look at the miles of line, those are always good things for you guys to keep in mind when we talk about our maintenance programs and how we're changing out old sections of town with new sections of town. And sometimes it's hard to really quantify how many miles of distribution line we have in town, because you just visually see it, it's all underground. And so when you have 150 plus miles of distribution underground, and it's a lot of miles that you need to keep repaired and keep up. And really our 2.5 miles of overhead lines, mostly is transmission, like we've talked about in the past. I just haven't gotten to the point where they're putting a lot of high voltage transmission underground because of environmental concerns and things of that nature. So that's mostly our transmission. So, any questions on kind of the reporting that we're doing and the benchmarking that we're doing on the electric side?
Sounds like you're pleased with the report's findings.
Yeah, I mean, we're always fairly consistent. I mean, sometimes we have outages underground, but there's either bad wire or there's a fault, or sometimes, what we've had in the past too is sometimes some things get nicked, by excavators, and they get covered up and we don't know. And so when we have an outage and we go in and we do the investigation, we find that someone peeled into our lines and some of that. But generally speaking, if there isn't some of that stuff going on, we typically just don't have a lot of faults. So obviously a big part of that is our maintenance program, right? Keeping up on older stuff that's 40 years old, 35 years old, 40, 50, or if we've had a fault in an area because maybe there's some bad conduit or bad wire in there, we put that on the radar screen. And if we have a second one, we'll change out some of those things and reroute some of our priorities to maintain these types of benchmarks. So it's like nothing that you guys haven't heard. We've talked about the reliability here is as good as you're going to get for an electric company because of the build out and how they plan over the years. So.
Any other comments, concerns, questions?
Think we'll ever
Sounds
get that
great.
extra 2 miles underground?
Some juncture probably will be. Yeah, at some point I think they'll be pulling down the road where transmission lines will be underground as well. A lot of areas are already working on some of that, so yeah, at some point we probably will have that underground.
And we've talked about this in multiple points, but historically, reliability's been a big topic and a big priority for prior commissions, and it remains that way with this commission. So happy to see that the reliability is rated as strongly as it has been in the past, and kudos to you and your staff on that, Jerry.
All right, agenda item 8C is the discussion of reinstituting the disconnections process.
So I sent you guys out last week what I'm calling the transition plan here, back into what essentially would be our normal business process had it not been for the COVID and obviously the pandemic that happened as we move forward. So generally speaking, and I kind of gave you some bullet points, we've talked with the Department of Commerce over the last several months, and all indications kind of trended them towards obviously recognizing that utilities have had issues with people with large arrearages. They've had uncollected balances that are creating cash flow issues. The polar vortex obviously compounded the problem with utilities having to pay out large amounts of expenses to cover natural gas costs, in the same token of not being able to collect unpaid balances for a lot of people in a lot of areas for well up to a year, 16 months. And so they've become way more receptive to understanding that at some point utilities have to start getting back in the disconnection process, or at least using that mechanism to get people to call in and make payment arrangements. And that's really the crux, I think, for you guys to understand. with the disconnection process, it isn't that utilities like disconnecting people. It's the only mechanism that a utility really has to get someone to call up and work with their utility to create some type of payment arrangement that works for them. And so even, like here, even we've talked about, if you just call up and say, hey, I can make $5 a month or 10 or something, we'd much rather have you do that than have us come up and disconnect you, because that's the only way you're gonna call us. And so really the disconnection process for a lot of utilities is their only means of getting someone to take the initiative to call us. So that's really where it's at. The Department of Commerce knows that. They've talked about that extensively with their agencies. The piece that we don't necessarily have as huge of an issue is, we're not sitting with millions of dollars of arrearages here, like we've talked about in the past. Our customer base is really good for the most part. We have a good customer base on the residential side, with businesses. They try to make their payments, and if most of them can't, or they can't make that payment, they'll call and say, how can you help us? And so we're not in a huge financial situation like a lot of these utilities are, and that's why they're pressing the issue with the state. But on the same token, the Department of Commerce and these agencies know that we gotta start getting back to some normal business where utilities can start getting back to some general cash flow. The PUC has also said, yep, we're fine with that. The industrial and utilities, they've had to provide their transition plan. So they've all had to submit plans to the PUC for approval. Most of their plans will start up August, September timeframe. That's usually when they do their rate readjustments as well. But they've acknowledged, yep, we can't allow you guys to keep going without collecting unpaid balances and thinking you're gonna be able to be sustainable financially when you have all these other costs that you've just incurred over the last year and haven't been able to recover those things. So a lot of municipals, so we talked about it extensively last week at MMUA. Some utilities have already started. They've been running disconnect for a while. Owatonna, they've been disconnecting, running their normal process for several months now. Detroit Lakes has been doing that. Dave over in Glencoe has been doing that. I would say the majority of utilities have been real hesitant about starting that because of the initial feeling from the Department of Commerce about, hey, if everyone starts doing that again, they may put some regulatory restrictions in place. But that seems to have generally kind of went away now and said, yeah, we understand. But here are the major things that we are asking you guys to do. More of a common courtesy than anything is one, make sure that before you start disconnecting that you give people plenty of notice. Not only your customers, but the CAP agencies that you use, because they just need to understand that if they're gonna have an influx of customers now calling because everyone's starting to disconnect, they need to be able to be prepared for that with staffing and making sure they have the proper processes in place to do that. The funding is there. There's plenty of funding out there through LIHEAP, social service programs, the federal stimulus dollars coming in. So they've even extended some of the requirements as far as deadlines and timelines to apply. So there should not be any issue of customers not being able to get money to pay up the majority, if not all, their bill. So it's a matter of getting them to take that step to do that. So those are the kind of the big pieces. The other piece that they've enforced, or that the PUC is wanting investor-owned utilities to do, and this is something I've put in our plan, doesn't necessarily mean we have to. I think it's a good thing from a customer standpoint, was really a safety net. So they're requiring the IOUs to say, hey, if you get someone to make a payment arrangement and they, for whatever reason, they couldn't make a payment for a month or 2 months, you have to allow them to get back on the payment plan before you start charging them fees, penalties, and disconnecting them. So it's kind of giving customers a safety net. I think they're leaning more towards having them do it for 2 months, however they can do it to 2 months. Of course, there was some pushback at the investor-owned utilities saying people are just gonna know that then they're not gonna make payments for 2 months, and they know that we can't disconnect them, so they're kind of going back and forth on that piece. But that was the other piece that was talked about, was just giving, at least from a municipal standpoint, a consideration for giving them a one-time or short-term safety net. If something dramatically changes with the customer on no fault of their owner, hey, now they got laid off, or something changed with financial circumstances at home, or whatever the case may be. So those are kind of the three big items, and so I tried addressing obviously the big items from the Department of Commerce. I tried, again, blending, making sure that we're staying financially stable, that we're getting back into our normal business operations, but yet also understanding that, we want to be receptive to our customers because we're community owned and we want to work with our customers and do those. So before I get into transition plan, is there any particular questions? I know Monty, you sent me an email. I could touch on that quick.
Yeah, wherever it's appropriate.
Okay, well, I'll tell you how much it would affect and we go into the transition plan. So we have about 7,400 customers. On average, we put about 800 a month on the disconnect list. So that's about 10% of our customers. So what that means is when they get on the disconnect list, that means we send them out a disconnection notice. We say, hey, you have an unpaid balance, you haven't paid. And by the time you get on the disconnect list, it's usually about 45 to 60 days out already. So it's not, hey, you didn't pay this month's bill and you're in the disconnect. It's the second month after. So when we send the disconnect letters out, it's usually about 800. And that's, when we send that out, that's when then people call up, right? Oh, I'll make my payment, I forgot about it, or hey, I need to make a payment arrangement. So by the time it gets down to where we actually disconnect people, we usually run at about 40 a month. So that's less than 0.5%. So the big piece that I kind of emphasized at the beginning of why people use the disconnection is to get people to take the initiative to call in, right? So you can see how dramatically a lot of times it drops from 800 to 40 when they get that list. Now some of them, they just forget about it. So when that comes up, we say, hey, if you're a repeat kind of offender and you just keep forgetting about it, then set yourself up on auto pay or set yourself up on the email notification. So we get people to move that way. But there's a lot of people, like any business, they know the system, right? And so they're not going to call and they're not going to make the payment until, you're going to come out there and shut them off. So we do have a handful of those soon. And I would say we probably have a dozen to 2 dozen that are people that just want to play that game, play that system. Out the 40, some, 10, 15 of those, sometimes they forget about it or they didn't have the money or they forgot to call, or some people don't want to go to the CAP agencies because they have too much pride and they don't want to ask for help and assistance. And we keep encouraging them. That's why they're there. We all understand people have bad circumstances or situations that happen, but there's funding there, and they're encouraging us to get that out because they want to use the funding. They want the money to be used for utility bills, for mortgages, for rents, for things of that nature. So that's kind of percentage. About 10% get on the disconnect list, and about 0.5% actually physically get disconnected every month. So then, kind of going to this transition plan. I tried keeping about a 60-day window. I think that's appropriate for us. Again, if we were in a major financial hardship, I'd say we maybe want to compress that down, but I think we get all plenty of notification, get people realizing, hey, we're going to start this process. I'm hoping through this first 60 days where we do the outreach to the CAP agencies and the customers that after the first notice goes out, hey, that we're going to start this process up, that we'll get people to call in and say, hey, yep, I see that you're going to start. We'd like to get up on a payment arrangement and try to stay on the disconnect list. So we're talking about sending out 2 notifications, one in May, one in June. And then once we would start disconnecting, the process would be about mid-July. We would also extend for 60 days. So once we start the disconnection process, we'll give 2-month buffer where we won't charge a disconnect fee, a reconnect fee, any type of fees on that. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, our number 1 priority is to get people to pay their energy bills, not keep tacking on fees. That makes it harder for them to pay their bills. Now, some utilities have said, no, if we're going out there to disconnect you, you're getting the additional fee because it's our staff time and that's what it is to go and disconnect that. You guys certainly, if you want to go that route, you can. I think our number 1 priority is to get people to get on a payment plan or pay their energy bill, pay for the energy they used. It can cover the cost of our activities to go up, disconnect, reconnect, and do some of those. So we would temporarily suspend that for 60 days after we start the disconnection process. So that would take us out into September, where we wouldn't start adding those fees back on until September. So we waive those late fees and penalties up until through September timeframe. I would still leave the discretion with customer services, I'm recommending them, letting them work with each individual customer on their own financial needs and where they're at with their balances, because we have a range of people that have a $200 balance and some that have a $2,400 balance, and so some people, the investor loans are kind of trying to create a little bit more of a structure where you have to give them up to 24 months. We got some pushback on that, saying, well, if someone only has a $200 arrearage, why do they need 24 months to pay it back? They could probably pay it back in 4 months. And so I think what's worked well for us is just allowing people, following the girls up front, to have discretion on working with that. That seems to be very receptive. So I'm recommending that to you guys. I got the safety net in there where they can miss one payment right now. So if you get on an arrangement plan and you miss a one-time, we'll say, fine, okay, pick it up the next month and get back on the plan. If you don't hold true to that, now you're missing a second and third pay month, then we're gonna just start the normal disconnection process with you and move down that plan, down that piece. We'll also, as part of our transition plan, make sure we get out there more of the financial assistance avenues that are out there. Kind of the new one that's out there is Rent Help Minnesota. That's more on the landlord side and tenant side, where they can go and can get money to help pay their rent, their mortgages, but it also allows them to pay for their utility bills as well. So that's another option that's on there besides the normal UCAP agencies that are kind of listed on the sheet that I sent you guys. And so there's plenty of resources out there for customers, which is I guess the priority. The main message you want to get out there is there's plenty of avenues to help get you caught up on some of your utility bills. So that's kind of the general time frame. So we'd be pushing out communication for several months, getting people to recognize that we're going to start looking at doing this. We'd start the process of disconnecting in July. We wouldn't have any late fees for July or August, and then we would reinsert the disconnection or just our normal fees and penalties in September. That would put us out about, when we start the disconnection in July, that would put us out 16 months since we had disconnections in place. We're getting close to a year and a half on that piece. We also work with them. We understand, I talked with the laser front, obviously, and we get notified from the CAP agencies as well if people are in the process of applying for funding. We won't disconnect those people if we hear, yep, they're going through the process and it's going to take a week or two or a month to get the money to you. We're not going to disconnect those people as long as they're making the effort to try to get some help. We're going to recognize that piece as well. We'll also, besides the mailing communications, we're going to get stuff on Facebook, on our website. We'll do some automatic calling saying, hey, we're going to start these processes back up. Again, like we consistently do, just communicate the avenues and move people that way. So that's kind of the general transition plan. So thoughts, concerns, any particular things you want us to address, change?
Seems like now's the time to do it, with hearing that there's plenty of help out there to get people caught up, and we're making the effort to connect them there. I think that makes the timing right. Try to get it cleared up, all those funds are available.
I think the approach of empowering your customer service folks is a really good approach, because there's definitely winners and losers out of this pandemic, and some people that have dents in the fenders and some people whose finances were hit even harder. So the flexibility allowed, I think, is an important part of it.
And they know the customers better than anybody.
Correct.
That's a
Yeah.
great point, Anthony.
So I like how you designed it.
Mhm.
And the one piece that came up is there was, is there going to be some concern because we're still in the, peacetime emergency of having a major issue with that, with the governor or whatever. And so the Department of Commerce said, I kind of alluded to that, we're going to be in this emergency, peacetime emergency for a while because there's these federal dollars, there's strings attached to those federal dollars. And so, they've recognized the fact that you guys all voluntarily went into this back in March of 2020 that you're voluntarily not gonna disconnect any people anymore while we're in this peacetime emergency, but they also recognize the fact we didn't realize this was gonna last this long, and it's probably not gonna end anytime soon. So we need to let you guys get back to your normal business. As long as you're doing it thoughtfully, the one concern they had is if you don't create some parameter around that. So in their situation, they talked about, and I look at it more of with large customer base. And their only concern was if you're just gonna roll it back out and just disconnect everyone like you normally do, and we get this huge influx of customers complaining about that at the state, then they may wanna do something different. So some of the recommendations, some of the thoughts that came out were, they were geared more towards large utilities, where maybe you look at let's start doing the disconnection on the people that haven't paid anything for 12 months, or use a dollar amount threshold and start with that portion, and then phase in another portion, and then phase in another portion. So that, I look at, a large investor-owned utility where they may disconnect 30,000 people. They're saying, you may want to look at taking the people that are the farthest behind and do that first to get them going. I didn't put any type of structure parameters in ours because we're only talking about 38 people, 40. So, if I said, hey, if we're going to take people that haven't paid anything for 12 months, we probably have 12 or 15 of the 40. So it isn't a huge impact. So I didn't put that in there. But that was another conversation point of maybe rolling it out in phases. But we just don't have a lot of numbers here, which is, again, goes back to we have a great customer base here. So we're not in the situation where a lot of utilities are.
Are you suggesting that 15 days to flatten the curve hasn't expired yet? Remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember.
Does anyone have any concerns about the transition plan, about just getting back into the disconnection process?
Pretty generous time frame.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Well done.
I like it.
I heard there's talk of a fourth stimulus, so who knows?
I think it makes a lot of sense, especially with the numbers.
Okay.
Yep, I do.
All right, that brings us to item 9, is to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Motion by Bob,
I'll second.
second by Don. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Also visit the state-of-the-art Creation Museum on a trip through biblical history. On the way home, we'll stop and tour Churchill Downs, home of the Kentucky Derby. Book now before it's sold out. Go to inksteadtours.com or call 218-451-4FUN. The Ark Encounter, another great Inkstead Tours adventure awaits.
Remember all the great songs from the 70s, 80s, and 90s? We do.
The legends play here.
1260 AM and 96.5 FM.